This is Synthesis TV, keeping you on the edge of technology and business.
A very good day to you. I'm Howard Feldman, and this is an episode of Synthesis TV. Very, very excited today to be joined by Gilan Gork. He is a mentalist, he's a motivator, he's a speaker, and we are looking forward to him sharing some of his insights. Also joined by Elmarie Grant, who heads up the Synthesis Academy, very involved with training, with motivation of people and making sure that really we get the best out of ourselves. Good afternoon, both of you. How are you doing?
Hey, man. Great.
Hi, Howard.
How's it, Elmarie? So, Gilan, if we can just start with you. Obviously, as a mentalist, I mean, it's all very well to I don't know, do cool things that wow us. But the reality is it's all based on understanding who we are, understanding human nature. And of course, that means that you have this ability to do something quite magical with it in terms of assisting people.
Yes, I mean, my background as a mentalist, if anyone watching has followed my career, started off with just doing these crazy demonstrations of, reading what people are thinking. It comes across as very psychic, and it's not, by the way. I'm the first to admit that I have zero. There's nothing supernatural about me. There's a lot of psychology that goes into it. There's a lot of showmanship that goes into it. There's a myriad of different skills, a spectrum of skill that goes into doing that. And, in my career, very early on in my career, I had people come up to me and say, like, it's great to watch this, it's entertaining. How do we take a working application of the kind of psychology that to be able to improve our lives? And business was a very obvious application because the topic that I'm really passionate about is influence. And influence can be applied to anything from sales, negotiation, marketing. But the area that I really passionate about is leadership, because leadership and influence are the same things. And then over the years, it's progressed where I've understood that there's two different games of influence. There's the outer game of influence, which are the things that we do and say to influence other people in positive ways. This is what we do as leaders. Our job as leaders in a company is to be able to influence the culture of the organization to be one of high performance aligned to the strategy. So that's where influence fits in for leadership. But what a lot of leaders find, especially in today's world, is that the first person I need to influence is myself. So that's the inner game of influence. And if we fail at the inner game of influence, we tend to fail at the outer game of influence. If we only develop the outer game of influence, the things to do and say to influence others, but then we find ourselves in situations where there's high pressure, high stress, lots of change going on, lots of uncertainty going on, people just tend to revert back to default. And that's why the inner game is so important. So right now, my focus is on the inner game of influence. How are we influencing ourselves so that we can cope with everything that's happening in the world, not only to cope, but also to thrive and reach peak performance?
Sure. So it's interesting because COVID changed our world a little bit in that in years gone by, we would leave all of our emotional stuff, a lot of our personal stresses, we'd have to leave them at the door. We wouldn't know if a colleague had a family, didn't have a family, because there were certain things that were very, very were taboo, really, in the work environment. COVID, of course, and it was changing before, but then we get to a COVID situation and we're all home, we're all on Zoom calls, and suddenly our kids and our pets and our spouses or partners are all involved in our lives. And all of a sudden, we laid bare. And that's, I guess, good and bad. How does this impact now on some of the work that you do?
Well, I mean, I think that we tend to have concepts for everything in life. We tend to think our brain is a judging machine. We tend to judge this as good and this is bad and this is, and work must be this. We had these definitions for work, and then work must be separate from our private life. And or for some people, they say, no, I'm a whole human being. all of these things are storylines. All of these things are concepts. And we understand the world and we interact with the world around us because we have concepts, we have definitions for things, we have understandings of things, and we are constantly applying, we're constantly assigning meaning onto everything. And so, what I found working with leadership teams, because most of the work that I do are with senior leadership teams, excos and so on, is that the highest performing teams are people who have developed trust and psychological safety. And in there is the ability to share openly with each other and not to feel guarded, to be able to share the good and the bad, the personal, the not so personal. It's not to say that there's no boundaries.
Correct. No, I just actually wanted to ask Elmarie about that. Sorry, Elmarie, because, from the Synthesis Academy, from a training perspective, your observations around this, actually, I imagine, you must see an interesting shift as well.
Yeah, so I think there's been a couple of things that have been really interesting to see with people bringing these whole selves to work all of a sudden, or not being able to divorce themselves from their home selves in a way because they are working from home. And I think one of the things that is really prevalent and that we are seeing is this incidence of burnout and how people are now struggling to cope with the demands that is placed on them constantly. There's no time for switching off or context switching between home and work. And so they're really finding themselves having to be energized and on and influence themselves and others all the time. How have you seen this play out? And do you have ideas or strategies around how we can help people navigate some of this?
That's a great question, and so prevalent in today's world. There are so many different ways that we could approach this particular topic. It could range from people, saying, here's some physical techniques that you could use, breathing techniques, or go for a walk when you're feeling stressed out, or get enough sleep. Like there's that whole side of things. But I suppose, let me take the opportunity to talk about a side that I don't think a lot of people speak about, which is the cause, I believe, of pretty much all of our psychological suffering in life. And that is that we tend to have burnout because we're so busy inside resisting what's going on the outside.
Wait, say that again, because I think that's...
Let me say it again, and I'll say it slightly differently. We all know people who are absolutely busy. They're always busy with something, right? Mm-hmm. They're taking work home at night, and I'm not endorsing or saying you should be taking work home at night.
But all right, Simon.
But we know people who do. We know people who are constantly busy, and yet they've got energy.
We've all got a friend who does that, right?
Absolutely. We know people who just have this, like they're like a dynamo. And the more stuff they do, they just constantly energized. And then, of course, we know people, maybe it's even ourselves, that there's just a sense of friction. There's a sense of resistance inside, and we just feel constantly exhausted. It's a lot of work to have to keep dealing with everything that is happening around us. Things are changing really quickly. There's all of this uncertainty that's happening. I thought that things were going to happen in this way, but suddenly it was unpredictable and something was disrupted. I wanted a meeting to go this way. There was this really big opportunity, and maybe it didn't work out as planned. There's this competitor, and there's just it is endless. We could write, the list would be infinite of how many things can cause some kind of a friction that can wear us out, wear us down, and make us feel burnout. So I feel that if there was one thing that we should try to really embody and understand, is what we can control and what we can't control. And it's in trying to manipulate the world around us. It's in trying to come up face on with the world around us, trying to change it and force it to be what it's not, that creates a lot of the burnout that we're feeling. We're in a constant struggle, a constant fight with life. So there are some perspectives and techniques that can help with that, but the bigger picture is, and I really feel that if we can get almost like a radical acceptance for the way things are, and to understand what we can and can't control, it will just ease a lot of that psychological suffering, because then we're not spending all that time complaining about what's going on. We're not spending all that time trying to change things that can't actually be changed. And will eliminate a lot of that psychological suffering. Not only will that acceptance eliminate that, but we'll be able to actually start working with what's happening in front of us, because we're no longer fighting with life. We're moving with life. And there's a big difference.
Are those things like the value of the rand in South African terms, load shedding? We can't control that. So fighting against that, all that does is actually just cause us more anxiety and stress. Is that really what the type of thing you're talking about on a simple level?
Yes, on a simple level, those are obvious ones that we can look at, the load shedding, the economy, all of these things. But what about the moment in front of you right now?
Right.
Like each and every moment that's in front of you is the sum of everything that's come before it to make it what it is from the time of the Big Bang. Like we could trace it back, right? And the thing is that we have no idea, just because we are aware of a situation, a moment that is unfolding in front of us, just because we're shining our light of awareness onto it, does not mean that we know how any situation should or should not be. And yet what happens is our ego, the voice in our head, knows how we want a situation to be in order for us to feel okay inside, for us to feel energized, to feel like we're happy, like we know how we want the moment to be. And when it's not what we want it to be, we start to feel all of that suffering. So we start to feel that resistance, that friction, and that can make us feel a lot more burnt out. But when we come to acknowledge and really truly accept that to be able to know what the moment in front of you is supposed to be or not is like me giving you a book. You open it up, you read the first word, I take it away from you, and I say, Howard, tell me what the book is about. There's just no way that you can know, because every person in that situation has got stuff right back from when they were babies and they were children, that things, insecurities, or strengths and weaknesses that they're all bringing. We don't know what's happened in their lives, and even the fact that like now we're having this conversation, there are so many different factors that have brought this moment to be exactly what it is, and it just is what it is. And so the moment we stop fighting,
there's a beauty in that, hey? There's something beautiful in that.
It is. It's taken trillions of years, billions of years, trillions of different factors, billions of years for this moment right now to be unfolding in front of us. Like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty grateful for this moment. Like, it's a pretty amazing thing.
I wasn't until now. Now I am. Elmarie, are you grateful?
I'm extremely grateful, and I'm grateful for this conversation, because I think there's something around this idea that once we accept the world for what it is, we can actually work creatively with it rather than against it, this intrinsic kind of resistance that we have to it. I read something really interesting the other day, and I actually wanted to play this back to you and ask you about it. I read about something called aggressive patience. And the idea is that we sometimes think patience is passivity, doing nothing. But it isn't. So if you think about planting a garden, you can plant the garden and leave it, and that's passivity. It's not patience and wait for things to come up. Or if you are aggressively patient, you can weed the garden every day, plant water the garden every day. And by being doggedly persistent, aggressively patient, that's when you're actually going to get those results. And so it's not a friction thing, Gilan, to what you were talking about, but it's kind of this acceptance of the world, but then working with it to then really create something extraordinary.
Absolutely. It's the difference between, well, there's two things here. There's the difference between hope and optimism. Optimism is just the belief that things will get better. It's just like a blind belief, but there's no real engagement in that, right? Whereas hope is more active. So you're talking about active and passive. Hope, we believe things will be better because we are together making things better, and that gives us hope. It's not just hope. If it's hope without any engagement, then that's just optimism. So I think that we need to know the differentiation, and we can be non-attached to outcomes because we don't control the outcomes. I can go into a sales meeting. Let's bring this into a business context.
And
This is a really important sales meeting, hypothetically. I've got my presentation. I've put together the best possible offer for them. I've put together the slide deck that is just phenomenally influential. You know, I've gone to a mentalist to teach me how to be as influential as possible. I've got the outer game of influence. I get there and the whole thing's a flop. The person doesn't buy. In fact, the person's barely even listening to me, right? Now, what could have happened? That person could have had a fight with their spouse, or something happened just before the meeting. Well, I have no idea. I could have had the exact same presentation and presented to that person in a parallel universe where they didn't have that fight in the morning, and they would have heard everything I had to say instead of them being lost in thoughts and all of their emotions, and it would have been a highly successful meeting. So what I'm saying is that outcomes we have no control over, because like I said, there are trillions of different factors that have made this moment exactly what it is. All that I can do is to bring, I call it our micro influence. So there's micro influence and macro influence. Our micro influence is what we can bring into the moment. But whenever we're in a moment, we're not separate to that moment. We are co-creating that moment. As I'm interacting with you here now, we are even co-emerging as people, right? That's what compassion and empathy is. We're both feeling each other. We're both impacting and influencing each other and co-emerging. And so we don't control outcomes. We can just bring what we bring into the moment, and the outcomes, you know, that's life. That's the universe. It'll take care of itself. And so when we stop resisting outcomes, when we're able to, it's like if you're playing a game of golf, right? And you say to yourself, okay, I'm going to hit the ball. This is the plan. I'm going to take my driver. I'm going to hit the ball all the way down the fairway. I don't play golf, so I hope I'm getting the terminology right. It's gonna land in the green.
So I was thinking here, because Guy plays a good game of golf.
What is it called? The fairway or the greenway? I'm not sure. But you down the fairway, it lands on the greens, and then I'm going to use my I'm going to use my 7-iron to get it onto the greens, and then my putt and get it in the hole. That's my plan, right? And I go and I hit the ball with the driver, and it lands in a bunker. It's in the sand. Would I go up to that ball and be like, well, no, my plan was to use the 7-iron anyways, and that's what I'm going to use? I'm going to fail, right? No, I'm going to look at where the ball landed, and I'm going to say, this is where it landed. The best thing I can do now is just to play it from where it's landed. So I'm going to use a sand wedge, which is the right club, to get it out of the bunker. And so this sounds obvious in golf. And yet what we're doing constantly is saying, no, this is the way I want things to be, and this is my plan. And then we try and force life in every moment to be what we want it to be. And we make it personal in that way. And then when it's not that, we still continue with our plan. It's what we got to get into the flow with life. We've got to become non-attached to outcomes and just bring our best influence into each and every moment, and then let go and see what happens next, and then get in the zone with life that way.
And that goes back to what Elmarie was talking about in terms of burnout, because maybe if we're not so resistant to an outcome, then it just becomes a lot less stressful, doesn't it?
It also sounds like there's a lot of kind of human nature and humanness in there. The more that we connect with people as people, use words like compassion and hope and all these really beautiful, positive people-related words. And it feels like the better we connect with people, the better outcome we're going to have, or the happier we're going to be in that process.
Yes. And what prevents us from having those connections is our ego. It's our ego. You see, our ego is what makes everything personal. We think that the moment in front of us needs to be a certain way. And so the moment we make it impersonal, life is happening and it's got nothing to do with us. Like there is something that is happening just, a few streets down from my office over here. There's things happening in the room next door to you. Those things would have happened whether you were there observing it or not. There are a million, gazillion, trillion, zillion, whatever moments happening all around the world. If we detach our awareness of them, they're all happening, and they will happen even without us being part of them, right? Just because we happen to be aware of this moment in front of us also doesn't mean it's got anything to do with us. And yet we make things personal just because we're now illuminating the moment with our conscious awareness. Instead, we want to interact with the moment and know that whatever happens, even if it's not what our ego wants to happen, it's happening because it's the culmination of all the forces and all the factors that have made it exactly what it is since the beginning of time, that things have come to this moment here. This moment in front of us is over 13 billion years in the making. And so for us to try and now change it, or to think it should be different, or that we don't know. So if we take the ego out of it and we make it impersonal, then all of a sudden it's a lot easier for us to assess how things are. So we come into every moment with a sense of honoring the moment, maybe even feeling grateful for it, even if it's a difficult moment, because
simply being part of the experience.
Yeah, we're just part of it. And so let's see how we can best interact with the moment. And we can always do that better when we take our ego out of it. We'll connect with people better, when we'll just have a much better flow of energy instead of that resistance and friction that contributes towards that burnout.
So it's so interesting, because as I love this concept. I think it's absolutely superb, and it's remarkably simple, and yet something that we maybe forget about. We don't think that we are very much part of a fabric of every experience. But then I was just thinking about a situation, and I would imagine as a mentalist, you probably are pretty much an empath, a hypervigilant empath in some ways. And for those of us who also can walk into a room and feel an energy and be almost quite impacted by an energy, a negative energy, a positive energy, how do you deal with that? So now you walked into a business meeting, and we don't know, as you've said before, what's gone on before. But for whatever reason, let's say there's a negative energy. Do we just let that go as part of that experience? Do we try and influence an outcome? How do we manage that?
I have an answer for that, but before I give my answer, I'm very curious to hear, Elmarie, what do you think about that? What's your experience been, and how do you handle something like that?
So I think the experience I've had is, just to come back to burnout, is that when you have an individual in a team, for instance, who is clearly suffering burnout, it's very easy for people to sit next to them and kind of take on some of that negative energy, take on some of those behaviors and the way that it plays out. Very often they even take on some of the language that people are using. And all of a sudden, whether I'm really burnt out or not, because I'm sitting next to someone who is actually suffering from it, I'm now imagining that I'm very, very burnt out. And I think it's kind of this group think behavior that humans fall into sometimes. And I think it's kind of, for me, the advice I would give there is, if you weren't sitting next to this person, what would your experience be? How would you really be feeling? Would you actually be feeling positive? So if you could imagine that this person isn't there. So trying to just see yourself in a slightly different context or perspective where you are not influenced can help you remind yourself of, actually, no, I'm not feeling burnt out. I might be feeling a little frustrated because my coffee was cold this morning, but that's not burnout. That's something that's completely removed. Actually, there's a lot of positives here for me to look at. So maybe that's one way from my experience, so how people can just remind themselves that what's around them isn't actually kind of, what they should be taking on.
Yeah. I agree with you. Groupthink can be a very dangerous thing. And so there's nuance here. There's kind of subtleties here, right? Because if we walk into a situation and we say to ourselves, whatever the energy is, I'm not going to let it touch me. Like, I'm going to reject. It's like if we had little hands inside, we're pushing away that energy, right? With those hands. And the problem with that is, well, let's start off with just a connection, right? Because in both of the examples that you've given, Howard, yours is walking into a room and you're wanting to connect with the people. Let's say it's a meeting. Elmarie, you mentioning that you got a colleague or somebody who is having a bit of a tough time. If we walk in with an internal feeling of, I don't want to hear any of it, like I'm not letting this touch me, then how do we actually connect with people? So to be able to really connect with people, we have to be able to allow, because remember, we are co-emerging in this moment together, who I am is impacted by my environment. It always will be. We think of ourselves as a bad habit of thinking. We think of ourselves as an individual that is completely separate to the world. But that's like saying that a tree is completely separate to the ground. You take away the ground, there's no tree, right? Take away the sky, there's no photosynthesis, there's no tree. A tree is a conversation, a dynamic conversation between the ground and the sky. It relies on both. We think of ourselves, our ego, as being this separate thing that is separate from our environment. Actually, we are always somewhere, right? And we are always interacting with not only our environment, but also with other people. And so we are co-emerging. Who we are is showing up and changing moment by moment, depending on the environment we're in, as well as the people we're interacting with. And when we can get in sync with that, if we're in front of somebody and we can allow for whatever they're going through to come into us, that allows us to then be able to co-emerge in a way that is effortless, that we're able to connect with that person. However, if we start, sorry, let me just take a step back. But if we start rejecting that and pushing that away, then we are increasing that sense of separateness, and that's going to land up causing a lot of issues. Never mind the inability to connect with people, but if we feel separate to the rest of the world, we're going to start feeling, we're going to lose sight of the fact that every moment is the sum of everything that's caused it to be, right? So we could think of that in terms of systems thinking, that there's all of this stuff going on. I'm also part of the world. I'm also in this moment. I'm co-creating it as well. So we're not separate to anything. And so we become, we feel more of that resistance that we were talking about a moment ago, where we lose sight of what we can and can't control. We become attached to outcomes when we feel separate. But we also don't want those emotions and that energy to come in and for us to start being negatively impacted by it as well. And so the way that I do that is to always remind myself. I ask myself a question and I say, who am I, or what am I that is aware of this situation or of this energy? Let's say this energy, because that's what you're mentioning. And so let me ask you that question. Let's say that you walk into a room and there's a negative energy. There's been a fight just before you walked in, and there's an energy. So who are you as you're standing there? Who are you? What are you that is aware of this energy? It's a bit of a weird question.
It's a great question because your answer might well be, well, I'm no part of whatever friction existed before. I'm a new energy in this environment, and therefore, just by recognizing that, maybe it brings a completely new situation to it. In other words, if they were fighting before, there was an argument before which you've stepped into, and you aren't part of that. Well, same as I've become part, as they, their energy becomes part of me, my energy becomes part of them. So in fact, we've created a completely new situation which can achieve and feel a little bit different.
And maybe another version of that is to go, well, I can sense the energy. I'm really concerned about the people that are here. Are they okay? And so by asking, what I can bring to make it okay, and I might not be able to change anything, and I might not go, yes, I will make it okay at any cost. But maybe just by asking that question, saying, how can I support you through this? Maybe that's the thing that then kind of, again, we now co-creating a new energy through your energy that's negative and my energy that kind of wants to see how I can help and better support.
Yeah, what you're both saying is 100% correct. And I'll add to it by saying that when I'm in a situation and I ask myself, what am I that is aware of this? The answer is I am awareness. Like I am just aware of what's happening. So I think that there's a difference between absorbing that energy versus just letting it in. And the best way to explain this would be with an analogy. Let's say that I'm holding up a mirror. I wish I had one here with me, but imagine I'm holding up a mirror. You're looking in the mirror. The mirror is reflecting everything that's in front of it. Or another way that we can think of it is that everything, we look into the mirror and we can just see a whole lot of stuff. It's like there's another world in the mirror. You know, I often think back to those movies where people then like walk into the mirror and they're in like a parallel universe. When you're looking into a mirror and there's a whole scene inside of it, the mirror is not holding on to any of that imagery. If I had to just move the mirror, or you look at it from a different perspective, there'll be a different imagery. So, you know, similarly, if you're driving in your car, in your rear view mirror, there must be thousands, if not millions, of different images that it's reflecting. It's not holding on to any of those images. So when we walk into a room and there's an energy going on, you can let that energy in, because just like a mirror that doesn't hold on to anything, you can let it in so that you can co-create and work with the moment, and yet not let that be part of you, because you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, you are not what's happening in front of you. Those are just perceptions. All that we are is the awareness of all of these things. We are like that mirror that is reflecting, that is showing in our mind. It's like we're seeing what's happening, and yet we don't need to hang on to it. We can let it come in so that we can co-create and engage with the moment. And then it doesn't stay. It's like, it's just impermanent. It then goes. Hope that makes sense.
It does make sense. We are definitely way over time. We don't normally do this for this amount of time, but I've absolutely loved it. So we are going to have to try and wrap this up. But so interesting, and you've really given me certainly a very different way of looking at it, because it's the removal of resistance in many ways, and acceptance that actually we're very much part of whatever experience we are living in, and that it just that to fight it really is to create completely unnecessary friction, especially because we might not be able to influence the outcome anyway to a great extent. So just accepting that, not investing so much in that, but being part of a process, I think is amazing. I do need to, unfortunately, need to wrap it up. Gilan Gork, thank you. Elmarie, thank you for your incredible input as well. Definitely want to continue this conversation another time. Put your comments in let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you would like to discuss further in the comments below. Subscribe, and let's make sure that we get some feedback from you so that we can move this in the right direction. I'm Howard Feldman, and this has been an episode of Synthesis TV.